All right, let's unpack this. We often hear these incredible success stories, don't we? The lone genius, the really determined entrepreneur pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, just pure grit.
Mm-hmm. That classic narrative.
Exactly. It's such a powerful idea, deeply ingrained in our culture, this myth of the self-made person. They did it all on their own.
Mm.
Does that ring true for you? Like when you think about successful people, is that the first story that comes to mind? That it's mostly about individual talent and just, relentless hard work?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely the dominant narrative. And it's compelling, isn't it? It's inspiring in a way. It makes these really complex journeys seem simple, almost heroic, just one person against the odds.
Yeah, it fits nicely with, ideas about individualism and effort.
It does. It's a very appealing story.
But what if that story? What if it's really incomplete? Or maybe even, well, fundamentally misleading?
That's the core question, isn't it?
Right. So this deep dive, it's all about challenging that very idea. We're digging into source material, mainly drawing from Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. The story of success, which argues that success isn't just about who you are inside, your innate gifts, or even just how hard you work as one person.
Yeah, the argument is that the real story is much, much bigger.
Yeah.
It's profoundly shaped by things we often just don't see or maybe ignore.
Things like,
Well, things like where you come from when you were born, your
yeah.
family background, the specific sort of historical and social circumstances you grew up in,
Uh-huh.
and the opportunities you were given, often opportunities that seem completely random or just lucky breaks, and even these really deep-seated cultural legacies. All of these, the source argues, play a huge, sometimes decisive role in shaping outliers.
Outliers, these people who achieve way beyond the norm.
Exactly.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to really get into this material. We want to pull out these fascinating insights, some of them quite counterintuitive, actually. We're going to explore how looking at success through this much wider lens, focusing not just on the person, but on the whole environment, the timing, the context, how that fundamentally changes our understanding of why some people make it big, while others, maybe just as talented or driven, don't.
It's about finding those hidden patterns, right?
Yep.
The factors working away beneath the surface of these individual stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah, it forces a shift in perspective. Instead of just asking, what's so special about this person?
Right. You start asking different questions,
Yeah.
like, how did they get the chance to practice that much? Or what was happening in the world when they were developing their skills?
Or where were they culturally, geographically, when they were putting in all that effort?
Yeah, it's like zooming out, moving from a tight close-up on the individual to a wide shot that takes in their entire world, their history.
Okay, let's dive right in then. The first really powerful idea the source hits us with right at the beginning is this notion that our environment, specifically our community, can massively impact outcomes, even something as basic as our health.
And the example used is really striking because it's not about, getting rich or famous. It's about physical health. It's the story of Roseto, Pennsylvania.
Ah, yes, the Roseto effect. Tell us about this place. What was going on in Roseto?
So Roseto was this small town in eastern Pennsylvania, kind of tucked away. It was founded back in the late 1800s by immigrants. And here's the key thing. They almost all came from one specific village in Italy, Roseto Valfratore.
Okay, so very homogenous origins.
Extremely. And what they did was recreate their Italian culture incredibly intensely in this new American setting. They kept speaking their dialect, the Southern Foggian dialect. They built houses where multiple generations lived together. They had their own local economy, blast mills, slate quarries, little shops.
The source paints this really vivid picture, doesn't it? People walking around, stopping to chat, sitting on porches, visiting each other all the time.
Exactly. It sounds almost idyllic, like a different era. Constant social interaction, strong family ties, really strong community bonds. They basically built their own little world there.
And they were kind of isolated from the surrounding towns.
Yeah, because the nearby towns were settled by different groups, Welsh, English, German. So Roseto stayed very much rose-tan. This sort of cultural and social cocoon was crucial.
Okay, so how did this tight-knit town end up on the medical radar?
Well, a doctor named Stuart Wolfe was visiting the area in the 50s, met a local physician, John Brune. Wolfe heard this rumor that people in Roseto, unlike folks in neighboring towns, just didn't seem to be dying of heart attacks nearly as much.
Which was a huge killer back then, right? Heart disease was rampant.
Absolutely. So Wolfe and Brune decided to investigate. This was, prime time for heart disease across America.
And they couldn't find the usual explanations. Diet,
Hmm.
exercise, genetics.
It was baffling. They checked everything. Their diet wasn't particularly healthy. Lots of sausage, meatballs fried in lard, cheese. Not exactly the Mediterranean diet we hear about now.
Mm.
Many men worked in the quarries, which was tough work, dusty, lots of them smoked. Obesity wasn't rare. Exercise levels, genetics no different from nearby towns like Bangor or Penargyle.
Yet their heart attack rates were significantly lower.
Dramatically lower.
Yeah.
For men under 65, virtually zero deaths from heart disease initially. Overall rates were sometimes half those in neighboring towns, and way below the U.S. average. It just didn't fit the standard medical models.
So after ruling out all the individual lifestyle factors,
Yeah.
what was left? What did they conclude?
They came to this, well, revolutionary conclusion for the time. The health of the Rosens wasn't about their individual bodies or habits in isolation. It was about the community itself.
The way they lived together.
Precisely. It was the social structure, the strong Pisani culture, as they called it. The close-knit families, the constant social interaction, the lack of status anxiety, the mutual support. It created this protective bubble that somehow shielded them from the stresses of modern American life that seemed to be contributing to heart disease elsewhere. Wolff apparently called it magical.
Wow. So the community itself was the medicine, in a way.
That was the radical idea. It wasn't the individual, it was the social ecosystem.
And the source emphasizes how hard this was for the medical establishment to swallow.
Oh, completely. It flew in the face of everything they focused on. Medicine, then, was all about the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Genes, blood pressure, cholesterol, diet, exercise. The idea that your town structure, your social life, could be a primary factor in heart health. It was almost heresy.
They were looking at EKG readouts, and Wolff and Bruin were talking about people chatting on porches.
Exactly. They actually had to bring in sociologists to help make sense of it because it was so far outside the standard medical framework. It just didn't compute initially.
So Rosetto becomes this powerful first piece of evidence in the book's argument. To understand exceptional outcomes health, in this case, you have to look beyond the individual.
You have to consider the context, the community, the culture, the advantages that world provides. It immediately challenges that default assumption that it's all down to the person.
It makes you wonder, if community can protect against heart attacks, what else can our environment enable? Or maybe hold us back from?
It really sets the stage for the whole book. The idea that the world around us, its values, its opportunities, its people, shapes us in profound ways we often don't fully appreciate.
Okay, so let's follow that thread. The next section connects effort and achievement, which seems straightforward. You know, hard work pays off, but then adds this critical twist: opportunity as the great enabler.
Right. This is where we get into the idea of deliberate practice and that famous, sometimes maybe oversimplified, concept, the 10,000-hour rule.
Ah, yes, the magic number. This came out of work by Anders Ericsson and his colleagues, specifically a study at a music academy in Berlin.
That's the key study highlighted. Ericsson's team went to this elite Berlin Academy of Music and studied violin students. They divided them into 3 groups based on the professor's judgments. You had the stars, the ones with potential to be world-class soloists, then the good students, and finally, a group likely heading towards being music teachers.
And they asked them about practice time.
Yeah, a pretty simple question. Over your entire career, since you first picked up the violin, how many hours have you practiced?
And the results were pretty stark.
Incredibly consistent.
Oh.
By age 20, the elite players, the stars, had all clocked up roughly 10,000 hours of practice. Every single one.
Wow, okay. And the others?
The good students, they averaged around 8,000 hours. And the future music teachers, only about 4,000 hours.
That's a huge difference, and they found this elsewhere too.
Yes, they did a similar study with pianists. Same pattern emerged. The top performers had accumulated around 10,000 hours by age 20, significantly more than the merely good ones, and vastly more than amateurs.
So the big insight here isn't just practice makes perfect, which, okay, we kind of know. It's that among people talented enough to get into a top academy,
Right, among people with that baseline ability.
the main thing separating the very best from the rest isn't some extra spark of innate genius being a natural. It's the sheer volume of dedicated, deliberate practice.
Exactly.
Mm.
Ericsson's group looked hard for naturals, people who got to the top without massive practice and couldn't find them among the elite. They also didn't find grinds, people who practiced constantly but never got good in that top group either. It strongly suggests that once you're good enough to be in the game, reaching the absolute peak is largely about putting in the hours, thousands and thousands of hours. No shortcuts.
Okay, but here's the crucial part, the bit that ties it back to challenging the self-made idea. The 10,000 hours highlights the effort. Sure, you have to do the work. But the source then gives these amazing examples showing that you needed specific, often really rare opportunities to even get those hours in, especially early on when it matters most.
Yes. The effort is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You need the chance to put in that effort. Access to the right environment or circumstances is the often invisible key.
Take the Beatles. We think of them as, these four musical geniuses from Liverpool who just exploded onto the scene.
And they were geniuses, no doubt. But the source argues their incredible success wasn't just talent suddenly blooming. It was talent meeting this absolutely unique opportunity to practice performing relentlessly.
This was in Hamburg, Germany, before they were famous.
Exactly. Before Beatlemania, before Ed Sullivan, they spent years playing in these rough clubs in Hamburg. And what made Hamburg special wasn't the glamour or the pay. It was the insane amount of time they were required to be on stage.
Like really long hours, night after night?
Unbelievable hours. We're talking multiple sets playing for 5, 6, sometimes 8 hours a night, 7 nights a week sometimes.
Wow.
The numbers, the source quotes are staggering.
Yeah.
Between 1960 and the end of 1962, they performed live on 270 nights. By the time they hit it big in 64, they'd performed live an estimated 1,200 times.
1,200 times before they were really famous.
Yeah. Think about that. Most bands today don't play 1,200 shows in their entire careers. This was their crucible. John Lennon said it himself. We got better and got more confidence. We couldn't help it with all the experience playing all night long.
So Hamburg was their 10,000 hours, essentially, or a huge chunk of it gained through this grueling, unique opportunity.
It was this intense, forced practice environment that forged them into the tight, incredibly skilled live band they became, an opportunity most bands simply never get.
Okay, and then there's the ultimate icon of the self-made tech genius, Bill Gates.
Right. Dropped out of Harvard, started at Microsoft, became the richest man in the world. The perfect pulled himself up by his bootstrap story.
But the source digs into his childhood and finds, what? Not just brilliance, but a series of lucky breaks.
An extraordinary series of lucky breaks, highly improbable opportunities that gave him access to computers and programming time decades before almost anyone else's age.
It started at his school, Lakeside.
Yes. In 1968, think about how early that is. Gates was in 8th grade. His private school, Lakeside, got a time-sharing computer terminal connected to a mainframe. This was incredibly rare. Most colleges didn't have computer clubs then, let alone a high school terminal. That's opportunity number one.
And the school could afford the time on this expensive machine.
Well, initially, yes, but then the money ran out. But then came opportunity number 2. The Lakeside Mothers Club held a fundraiser and raised thousands of dollars, a lot of money, then specifically to buy more computer time for the students.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty unusual support.
Very. And then that money ran out. But opportunity number 3 popped up. A local company called C Cubed needed programmers to test their software on nights and weekends. Gates and his friends got basically unlimited computer time in exchange for finding bugs.
So free access just when he was getting hooked?
Exactly. Then came opportunity number 4. Another company, ISI, needed help writing a payroll program. The payment. More free computer time. Gates himself said he lived at the ISI offices, programming constantly.
This is where the hours really started racking up, enabled by this access.
Absolutely. He was obsessed. He said he was getting in 20, 30 hours a week during high school. Then came opportunity number 5.
Yeah.
He happened to live within walking distance of the University of Washington.
And they had.
They had a mainframe computer that had free time available, but only between 3 and 6 in the morning.
3 a.m.
3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Gates used to sneak out of his house, walk, or bus over in the middle of the night to get this free programming time. Who else had that kind of dedication in that specific, weird window of opportunity?
Almost nobody. It's an incredible convergence of circumstances.
And it continued getting special permission to spend a semester programming for a company, more unique access. The point the source makes is that over about 5 years, from 8th grade through high school, Gates accumulated thousands upon thousands of hours of programming practice. His Hamburg, exactly. So by the time the personal computer revolution really kicked off in the mid-70s, he wasn't just a smart kid interested in computers. He already had the equivalent of years of professional programming experience under his belt, thanks to this extraordinary, unrepeatable series of opportunities.
This really hits home, doesn't it? Challenging that self-made myth. We see the genius, the drive, the success. We don't see the lucky breaks, the rare access, the historical timing that made it possible for him to put in those 10,000 hours when virtually no one else could.
We focus on the individual achievement and miss the crucial scaffolding of opportunity that supported it. His effort was immense, yes, but the conditions for that effort were incredibly privileged and rare.
Okay, so opportunity is key for practice. The source then goes even further, looking at how factors that seem totally arbitrary, like your exact birth date or your family-specific background, can create these early advantages that just snowball over time.
Yeah, this leads into the idea of a cumulative advantage, and the first example is the relative age effect.
Right, this came from studying Canadian hockey players, Roger Barnsley's work.
That's right. Barnsley, a psychologist, was at a hockey game and noticed something odd looking at the program roster for an elite junior team. A surprising number of the players were born in January, February, or March. Far more than you'd expect by chance.
And the reason turned out to be the league's cutoff date.
Exactly. In Canada, for most youth sports leagues, the eligibility cutoff date is January 1st. So a kid born on January 2nd is in the same age group for that year as a kid born on December 30th.
But they're almost a full year older.
Right. And when you're 6 or 7 or 8 years old, when kids start getting selected for the more competitive rep teams, that nearly 12-month difference in age means the January kid is likely to be physically bigger, stronger, more coordinated, maybe even a bit more mature mentally.
Not necessarily more talented in the long run, just more developed at that moment.
Precisely. But because they look more skilled then, they're the ones who get picked for the better teams. They get the better coaching, they play more games, they practice more, they face better competition.
And that initial small advantage, based purely on birth month?
It compounds. It snowballs year after year. The slightly older kids get the enriched environment, which makes them even better, reinforcing the initial selection. It's a cumulative advantage in action.
So the system, which looks like it's based on merit picking the best players, is actually deeply skewed by an arbitrary birthday lottery.
It's massively inefficient at spotting overall talent. Kids born later in the year who might have equal or even greater potential get overlooked or discouraged early on because they were simply less physically mature at that key selection point. The source mentions a Czech soccer team roster where almost everyone was born in the first half of the year, clear evidence that talent born later is being missed.
And this isn't just sports, right? The source says it happens in schools too, based on academic cutoff dates.
Absolutely. Same principle. If the cutoff for starting school is, say, September 1st, the kids born in September and October are the oldest in the class. They might seem more ready, perform slightly better on early assessments, get identified for gifted programs.
While the kids born in July or August, the youngest, might struggle a bit initially and get labeled differently.
Right, and those early labels and placements can set kids on very different trajectories based on nothing more than the month they were born. A small initial difference gets magnified by the system over time.
Okay, that's a powerful example of arbitrary timing. Then the source gives this incredibly detailed story about how a whole set of factors, historical timing, background, even discrimination, came together to create extraordinary success for one specific group. This is the story of the Jewish lawyers in New York City.
Yeah, this is a fascinating deep dive within the book. It looks at the generation of lawyers who built some of the most powerful corporate law firms in New York in the mid to late 20th century. And it finds this striking pattern. Many of them were Jewish men, born around the same time, the mid-1930s, often in the Bronx or Brooklyn, to parents who typically worked in the garment industry.
That seems like a very specific combination of factors. How did they all fit together?
Well, first, the timing of their birth. They were born during the Great Depression, which meant they were part of a relatively small generation, what the source calls a demographic trough.
Fewer babies born during those hard times.
Exactly. So when they reached college age in the 1950s, there was less competition for spots in universities and law schools compared to the generations before them, or the massive baby boom generation coming right after them.
So just statistically, they had a better shot at getting into good schools. The source mentions Ted Friedman getting into Michigan for cheap tuition.
Right. Affordable access to elite education opened up for them in a way it hadn't for others. That's factor one. Demographic luck.
Okay. What else?
Factor two, historical context. They graduated law school and started their careers in the late 50s and early 60s, right when the American economy was purring. corporate America was expanding rapidly, merging, acquiring, creating a massive surge in demand for sophisticated legal work.
So good timing again. They entered the market just as demand was exploding.
Perfect timing. Now, factor three is where it gets really interesting. They faced significant anti-Semitism and discrimination from the established, old-line New York law firms.
The white shoe firms, run by the waspy elite.
Yes, these prestigious firms simply wouldn't hire Jewish lawyers, often using vague excuses about them not fitting in. This seemed like a huge disadvantage, blocking them from the traditional path to corporate law success.
But it turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
In a crucial way, yes. Being shut out of the establishment forced them to go their own way. They started their own, often scrappy law firms, or joined smaller, newer firms outside the mainstream.
And these firms had to take different kinds of work.
They had to take whatever work they could get, whatever came in the door, as one lawyer put it. And critically, this often meant handling litigation courtroom fights and, most importantly, the messy, often hostile business of corporate takeovers, proxy fights, and corporate raids.
Work the fancy white shoe firms looked down on.
Exactly. The establishment firms preferred handling friendly mergers and standard corporate counseling. They disdained hostile takeovers as ungentlemanly and litigious. But because these newer Jewish firms had to take this work, they developed deep expertise in it.
Just as that kind of aggressive corporate maneuvering was becoming much more common and lucrative.
Precisely. Lawyers like Joe Flom, whose story is central here, became masters of the hostile takeover just as that field exploded in the 70s and 80s. The discrimination paradoxically pushed them into specializing in what turned out to be the future of high-stakes corporate law. What looked like a barrier became an opportunity.
Amazing. And there's one more piece, their family background in the garment industry.
Right. The source argues this wasn't just incidental. Growing up with parents who were dressmakers, tailors, pattern cutters, small factory owners, this provided invaluable lessons.
What kind of lessons?
Lessons in incredibly hard work, long hours, meticulous attention to detail, initiative, navigating complex deals, dealing with difficult people, understanding business from the ground up. The garment trade was, as the source puts it, a kind of boot camp for the professions.
Like the story of Louis Bourgonic, the author's grandfather, starting his apron business from nothing. That incredible drive and ingenuity.
Exactly. That story shows the entrepreneurial spirit, the hustle, the practical problem solving. And these kids absorbed that ethos. They learned how to work hard, how to be resourceful, how to negotiate. Ted Friedman's mother getting into Carnegie Hall by knowing Mary and giving her a quarter that taught him about navigating systems and using initiative, skills crucial for a lawyer.
So this wasn't just about being smart and hardworking in a vacuum. It was this unique, perfect storm. Born at the right demographic moment, entering the job market during an economic boom, facing discrimination that pushed them into a lucrative emerging niche, and having a family background that instilled precisely the right kind of practical skills and work ethic.
It's a stunning confluence of factors. Individual talent met a very specific, historically contingent set of circumstances that channeled that talent towards extraordinary success. It powerfully illustrates how much context matters. The source even contrasts Mort Janklow, born in the demographic sweet spot, with his older brother Maurice, born just a few years earlier, who faced much tougher competition and had a less stellar career, showing how timing mattered even within the same family.
This whole section really makes you question our standard definition of meritocracy, doesn't it? If your birth month or when you were born historically or your parents' job or even the prejudice you face plays such a massive role, is it really all about individual merit?
It certainly suggests the playing field isn't level, and that what we often celebrate as pure individual achievement is deeply interwoven with luck, timing, and inherited advantages or disadvantages that are completely outside the individual's control.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly now. Section 4 takes on another big assumption. The idea that super high IQ is the be-all and end-all for success.
Right. The source looks at the role of analytical intelligence, the kind measured by IQ tests, and argues that while it's important, it only gets you so far.
There's a threshold, it suggests.
Yeah, the research discussed points to a threshold around an IQ of a 120. Having an IQ at that level seems generally necessary, or at least very helpful, for handling complex material, getting through good universities, succeeding in demanding professions.
But beyond that point, does having an IQ of 150 make you significantly more likely to succeed in the real world than someone with 130?
Apparently not, according to the evidence presented. The correlation between IQ and real-world achievement seems to flatten out considerably above that 120-ish threshold. Higher IQ doesn't reliably predict greater success at the very highest levels.
The example about Nobel Prize winners is interesting here. They don't all come from the absolute most elite, highest IQ selecting universities.
Exactly. Nobel laureates come from a surprisingly wide range of undergraduate institutions, not just Harvard and Caltech. It suggests that once you have enough analytical intelligence to do the work to master complex physics or literature or whatever other factors become much more important in determining who reaches the pinnacle.
So if it's not just about having the highest possible analytical IQ, what else is crucial?
This is where the source introduces the idea of practical intelligence. It's presented as a different kind of smarts, separate from analytical IQ. Orthogonal is the technical term used.
Practical intelligence? Like street smarts? Or social intelligence?
Kind of. It's defined as knowledge that helps you read situations correctly and get what you want. It's about knowing how to do things in the real world, how to talk to people, how to persuade someone, how to navigate the rules, both written and unwritten, of an institution, how to get yourself out of a tight spot.
It's the know-how, not just a know-what.
That's a great way to put it. And crucially, the source argues, unlike analytical IQ, which seems largely innate, practical intelligence is something that is learned. It's not taught in schools. It's primarily absorbed from your family and your upbringing.
And this leads to that really striking comparison between two individuals, Chris Langan and J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Yes. Chris Langan is presented as having an exceptionally high IQ, maybe one of the highest ever reliably measured. Off the charts. He was reading college-level philosophy and physics as a teenager, largely self-taught. Just staggering raw analytical horsepower.
But his life story, as told in the source, is one of struggle to fit into conventional systems and achieve traditional success.
It's quite poignant. He got into college but dropped out. He lost the scholarship because his mother missed a deadline on a form, and he apparently couldn't navigate the bureaucracy to get it reinstated. He found the systems inflexible, didn't know how to work within them or advocate for himself effectively. He ended up working jobs like construction and being a bouncer. Immense intellect, but somehow unable to translate it into success within the structures of the world.
He lacked the practical intelligence to make the system work for him.
That's the argument. He couldn't get the world to see things his way, couldn't persuade, couldn't negotiate the social landscape effectively.
Now, contrast him with Oppenheimer, the head of the Manhattan Project.
Oppenheimer was obviously brilliant, a top physicist, but probably didn't have Langan's astronomical IQ score. What he did have, in abundance, was practical intelligence.
How did that show up?
Well, he navigated the complex social and academic worlds of places like Cambridge and Harvard. But the most dramatic example is how he got chosen to lead the Manhattan Project. General Leslie Groves was picking the scientific director for this top-secret, unbelievably complex project. Oppenheimer had major red flags past communist sympathies, a history of instability, including supposedly trying to poison his tutor.
Things that should have immediately disqualified him for the biggest military secret project ever.
You'd think so. But Oppenheimer, in his meeting with Groves, apparently gave an irresistible performance. He used his charm, his intellect, his understanding of Groves, an engineer, to frame the project in terms Groves would respond to as a massive practical challenge. He knew how to read the situation, tailor his approach, and persuade Groves he was the man for the job, despite the risks.
He knew how to play the game. He had that practical know-how.
He absolutely did. He could deploy his analytical intelligence effectively because he also had the practical skills to navigate the world and influence people.
And the source links acquiring this practical intelligence directly back to how you were raised, drawing on sociologist Annette Leroux's work on parenting styles.
Yes, Leroux's research identified two broad parenting styles, often correlated with socioeconomic class. Middle-class parents often practice what she called concerted cultivation.
Concerted cultivation, meaning?
Meaning they actively try to cultivate their children's talents and skills. They schedule lots of organized activities, lessons, sports, clubs. They reason with their children, encourage them to ask questions, negotiate rules.
And crucially, they teach them how to interact with institutions and authority figures.
Exactly. They actively intervene for their kids at school with doctors, etc. They model how to question authority, how to advocate for yourself. This teaches the child a sense of entitlement, not arrogance, but the feeling that you have a right to speak up, to be heard, to have your needs met by institutions. The example of young Alex confidently correcting his doctor about his age perfectly illustrates this learned comfort with authority.
That's practical intelligence being taught right there.
Pretty much, yes.
And the other style, associated more with working class or poor parents.
Leroux called that the accomplishment of natural growth.
Hmm.
These parents focus more on providing love, safety, and basic needs, and then letting children develop more naturally with more unstructured free time, less direct intervention in institutions. Children tend to play more with siblings and neighbors, figure things out for themselves.
And their relationship with authority figures tends to be different.
Yes, they tend to be more deferential, less likely to question or challenge adults. Their parents might feel intimidated by schools or doctors themselves. The example is Katie Brindle wanting to join the choir and just figuring out how to do it on her own initiative without parental orchestration.
Thoreau emphasizes neither style is inherently better or worse parenting.
No, parents are doing what makes sense in their circumstances. But in terms of preparing children to succeed in modern middle-class institutions like universities and corporations,
Concerted cultivation provides a significant advantage. It equips kids with the specific social and communication skills, the practical intelligence needed to navigate those environments effectively. The skills Oppenheimer had, and Langan perhaps lacked due to his very different upbringing.
right, so again, your success isn't just about what's inside your head, your IQ. It's also deeply shaped by the interaction skills you learned, often implicitly from your family background and social class, another factor largely beyond your individual control.
It just keeps layering on, doesn't it? These external factors shaping destiny. Okay, let's move to section 5, cultural legacies. This is really fascinating how patterns of behavior rooted deep in history and geography can still influence us today.
Yeah, the idea that culture isn't just beliefs or values, but an active inheritance that shapes how we act, sometimes in very specific, predictable ways.
And the first big example is the culture of honor, particularly strong in places like the Appalachian region, like Harlan, Kentucky.
Right. The source explains that this region was largely settled by immigrants from the borderlands of Britain, the very edges of Scotland, England, and Northern Ireland.
And understanding their culture means understanding the economy of those borderlands way back when.
Exactly. It was primarily a herding economy, raising sheep and cattle.
Mm.
Unlike farming, where your wealth is tied to the land, a herder's wealth is portable,
Mm-hmm.
your animals. And in remote areas with weak law enforcement, livestock is easily stolen.
So you have to protect yourself.
You had to build a reputation. You had to make it crystal clear that you would respond forcefully, even violently, to any threat, insult, or challenge to your property or your honor. It was about deterrence. Your reputation for toughness was your main security.
So violence wasn't just random, it served a specific social function in that context.
It was a necessary strategy for survival and maintaining status in that specific environment. And this culture of honor, this deep-seated belief in responding aggressively to perceived slights, was carried by the settlers to the remote, isolated Appalachian Mountains.
Which helps explain the famous feuds in that region, like the Hatfields and McCoys, or the Howard Turner feud mentioned in the source.
The argument is that these weren't just criminal disputes. They were rooted in this specific cultural logic. An insult wasn't just words. It was a challenge that, according to the culture's rules, demanded a strong, often violent response to preserve family honor.
And this isn't just historical interpretation, there's psychological evidence for this culture persisting.
Yes, the Nisbet and Cohen study at the University of Michigan is key here. They took male students from both northern and southern U.S. states and had an accomplice bump into them in a hallway and call them an asshole.
And they measured the reaction.
Yep, physiologically and behaviorally. Northern students mostly just shrugged it off or were amused, but the southern students reacted very differently.
How so?
They got visibly angry. Their cortisol levels, a stress hormone, shot up, their testosterone levels increased, and in subsequent tasks, they showed much more aggression and willingness to confront someone. They reacted as if their honor had genuinely been challenged.
Wow. So it's a measurable, deep-seated cultural difference in how you respond to an insult.
Exactly. It wasn't about individual personality. It was about this inherited cultural script from those borderland ancestors, still influencing behavior hundreds of years later, even among university students far removed from herding economies.
That's incredible. It shows how these cultural legacies are tangible forces shaping our automatic responses.
They provide a kind of default programming for navigating social interactions, especially conflict.
The source then contrasts this potentially problematic legacy with a different kind of cultural legacy, one connected to the author's own family history in Jamaica.
Right. Jamaica's history as a British colony created a unique social structure. Particularly important was the emergence of a significant colored or mixed race population.
And their position in society was different compared to, say, mixed-race people in the U.S. South.
Very different, according to the source. In Jamaica, this colored class gained civil rights and social standing much earlier. They occupied a middle ground between the white planter elite and the black majority. And because the white elite were often absentee landlords or transient officials.
They weren't the ones building the institutions of Jamaican society.
Largely not. That role and the opportunities that came with it fell disproportionately to the colored middle class. This created pathways into professions, law, medicine, teaching, business, politics, that were often closed off to people of color elsewhere.
So it created a specific structure of opportunity for this group.
Yes, a culture of possibility, as the source puts it.
Mm.
A belief within that community that advancement through education and professional work was achievable.
And the author's great-grandmother, Daisy Nation, embodies this legacy.
She was very much a product of it, and she actively pushed it forward for her daughters. She came from this background, deeply valued education, made huge sacrifices to ensure her daughters got tutoring and went to high school, used her social connections, like finding Mr. Chance to help, and benefited from fortunate timing, like an extra scholarship opening up.
So her daughter's success wasn't just their own effort. It was enabled by this unique Jamaican historical context that created opportunities for their specific group, and by their mother's drive and skill in navigating that system, which was itself part of that cultural legacy.
Exactly. It's another powerful example of how our path is shaped not just by us, but by the specific historical currents and cultural toolkits we inherit. In Harlan, the toolkit involved defending honor aggressively. In this Jamaican context, the toolkit involved leveraging education for upward mobility. Neither is inherently superior, but they represent different inherited strategies for navigating the world.
These legacies provide different filters and pathways. Okay, let's take this into the modern day in Section 6. How do these deep cultural patterns play out in seemingly unrelated areas, like math skills or even plane crashes?
This is where it gets really surprising. The source looks at potential links between language structure and math ability, drawing on researchers like Dehaene and Fuson.
Language affecting math? How?
Well, one observation is about the length of number words. Asian languages like Chinese, Japanese, Korean tend to have very short, single-syllable words for numbers, like si for 4, ki for 7 in Mandarin. English words are often longer.
And why does word length matter?
It relates to our short-term memory capacity. We have this verbal memory loop that holds about 2 seconds worth of sound. If the words for digits are shorter, you can fit more of them into that 2-second loop before they fade.
So speakers of those Asian languages might have a slight advantage in just remembering sequences of numbers?
That's the finding Dehaene reported. Chinese speakers, on average, could hold more digits in memory than English speakers, a small but potentially significant cognitive edge in early numeracy.
Interesting. And Karen Fuson's work adds another layer about the structure of the number system itself.
Yes. Fuson points out that Asian number systems are typically much more logical and transparent than English. For example, 11 is 10-1, 12 is 10-2, 21 is 2 10s 1. It directly reflects the base 10 structure.
Whereas English is weirdly irregular, 11, 12, 13, then 20, 30.
Exactly. It obscures the mathematical logic. 59 doesn't immediately tell you it's 5 10s and 9 1s. Fractions too. 3/5 in English just names it. Chinese literally says, out of 5 parts, take 3, which explains the concept.
So Fuson argues this makes math seem more intuitive, more like a logical system you can figure out for kids learning in those languages.
Yeah, less like a bunch of arbitrary rules and words to memorize, and more like something that makes inherent sense. Again, a subtle potential advantage conferred by the structure of the language itself.
Wow. Okay, from language to agriculture. The source then makes this amazing connection between traditional rice farming and a modern aptitude for subjects like math.
This contrasts the demands of wet rice cultivation, common in southern China and Southeast Asia, with historical Western farming.
Rice farming is notoriously difficult.
Incredibly demanding. It requires extraordinary diligence, precision, and coordination. You have to build and maintain intricate terraces and irrigation systems, carefully manage water levels, fertilize meticulously, transplant tiny seedlings, weed constantly. The force estimates the annual workload easily exceeds 3,000 hours.
3,000 hours. How does that compare to, say, medieval European farming?
European peasant farming was maybe 1,200 hours a year, often seasonal bursts of work followed by slower periods. Hunter-gatherers in fertile environments might work only 12-19 hours a week. Rice farming, especially historically, was uniquely relentless and required constant, careful effort.
And this intensity fostered a particular cultural value system.
It fostered a deep-seated belief that hard work, persistence, and meticulous effort lead directly to reward. If you put in the incredibly demanding work, the rice grows. It's a clear link between effort and outcome. This makes the labor, however arduous, feel meaningful. It cultivates a culture that values diligence, patience, and precision.
And the connection to math proficiency.
Success in mathematics, especially as it gets more complex, relies heavily on persistence and willingness to grapple with difficult problems. It's often less about instant insight and more about sticking with it, trying different approaches, not giving up easily.
Like the student Renee in the study who worked on one problem for 22 minutes.
Exactly. Most students gave up after a couple of minutes. Her willingness to persist until she got the aha moment is key. The argument is that the cultural legacy of the rice paddy valuing sustained, meticulous effort, because it historically yielded results, provides the perfect mental toolkit for tackling challenging math problems. It's not innate ability. It's a culturally ingrained attitude towards work and persistence.
So a historical mode of farming shapes a modern aptitude through learned work ethic. Fascinating.
It suggests that cultural attitudes towards effort, honed over centuries, can translate into advantages in seemingly unrelated modern fields.
Okay, now for maybe the most sobering example of cultural legacy in action, the ethnic theory of plane crashes, specifically looking at Korean era's problems in the 1990s.
Yeah, this is a tough but important section. Korean Air had a disturbingly high crash rate back then. Investigations repeatedly pointed not to mechanical failure, but to human error, specifically breakdowns in communication within the cockpit.
And this connects to cultural dimensions, particularly power distance, from Hosted's work.
Yes. Power distance measures how much a culture accepts and expects inequality and hierarchy. Some cultures, like the US or Australia, are relatively low power distance, more egalitarian. Others, including traditional Korean culture, are high power distance, meaning there's strong deference to authority and seniority.
How does high power distance affect communication between pilots, especially when something is going wrong?
In a high power distance cockpit, the first officer, co-pilot, or flight engineer might be extremely hesitant to directly challenge, correct, or even offer clear, unambiguous warnings to the captain, who is the senior authority figure. Even if they see a critical error, the cultural norms might compel them to use very indirect, mitigated language.
They might hint at the problem instead of stating it clearly.
Exactly. The source uses the tragic example of Avianca Flight 052, a Colombian crew, Colombia is also high power distance, which crashed near New York after running out of fuel. The co-pilot knew they were critically low on fuel but kept saying things like, "We're running out of fuel, sir," in a relatively calm tone to air traffic control. He never used the explicit urgent word emergency.
Because that would have been too direct, too challenging to the captain's management of the situation.
That's the interpretation.
Hmm.
His cultural programming made it difficult to be direct and assertive, even in a life-or-death situation. The communication failed.
And researchers like Fisher and Orisanu actually analyzed cockpit language for these levels of directness or mitigation.
Yes. They found a spectrum from a direct demand, turn right now, down through suggestions, queries, preferences, all the way to a hint. Maybe you want to look at that weather radar. They found pilots from low-power distance cultures tend to use less mitigation, especially captains speaking to juniors. But first officers, especially in high-power distance cultures, often use heavily mitigated speech hinting when talking up to the captain.
Which makes it easy for the captain to miss the urgency or dismiss the concern. The source even mentions Korean captains sometimes hitting junior officers.
Yeah, which would certainly reinforce a culture of silence and deference. The result was a cockpit culture where critical information wasn't flowing effectively, especially under stress. Errors could accumulate because junior officers felt unable to speak up clearly and assertively.
It's a chilling example of how a cultural legacy, perfectly functional in other contexts, could become a deadly liability in the specific, high-stakes environment of a modern airliner cockpit.
Technical skill wasn't the issue. It was the communication culture clashing with the demands of the task.
So, how did Korean Air fix this deeply ingrained cultural problem?
Their solution was radical. They hired an outside consultant who identified this power distance communication issue as key. And a major part of the solution was mandating that English become the language used in all cockpits.
English? Why English?
Because for Korean pilots, English wasn't their native language. It didn't carry the same deep cultural baggage of hierarchy, respect, and deference embedded in the Korean language's honorifics and speech levels. Speaking English allowed them, in a way, to step outside their usual cultural roles.
It created a more level playing field for communication.
Exactly. It enabled more direct, less mitigated communication between first officers and captains, reducing the power distance within that specific context. They could state concerns more clearly without feeling they were being disrespectful in the same way they might if speaking Korean. The source contrasts this with the direct style of Captain Surin Ratwat, hired during the reforms, showing how clear communication saves lives.
That's an incredible intervention. Using language change to overcome a cultural communication barrier that was leading to crashes.
It highlights how acknowledging and addressing these cultural factors, even though it can be uncomfortable, is sometimes essential. Ignoring them, as the source says, can have fatal consequences.
It really brings up different ways to look at this. You can marvel at the unexpected links, like rice farming and math.
Or you can focus on the urgent, practical need to understand cultural communication styles in our increasingly globalized and complex world, especially where safety is involved.
Mm.
It's not about judging cultures, but understanding how different cultural toolkits fit or clash with specific situations.
Absolutely. Okay, let's try to weave all these threads together now in Section 7. We've covered a lot of ground, from Rosado's community health to the 10,000 hours of practice needing opportunity, the randomness of birth month, the specific convergence creating success for New York lawyers, the limits of IQ versus practical intelligence learned from family, deep cultural legacies of honor or hard work, and even how communication styles affect flight safety.
It's a rich tapestry of examples, all pointing towards the same core argument woven throughout the source material. Success isn't just about the individual. It's not just innate talent or solitary effort.
Right. It's this complex interplay.
Exactly. An interplay between individual qualities and effort, yes, but also historical timing, where you grew up, your family's background, the cultural legacies you inherit, and the specific, often random, opportunities you encounter. Success, the source concludes, is fundamentally a product of the world in which people grew up.
So if we really take that on board, what are the implications? If success isn't purely individual, how does that change how we think about achievement and also about failure?
Well, it suggests we should be much more cautious about attributing failure solely to individual shortcomings, lack of talent, lack of drive. It forces us to ask what opportunities we're missing, what systemic barriers were in place, what cultural mismatches might have occurred. It calls for more compassion and a broader perspective.
And by focusing only on the individual, what potential might we be overlooking? What talent are we missing out on?
We might be systematically missing talent that doesn't fit the mold. Kids born late in the year, people from backgrounds that didn't provide that concerted cultivation, individuals whose cultural styles don't mesh neatly with dominant corporate or academic cultures, even if they possess other immense strengths. We might have a very narrow definition of who gets to succeed.
So how should this change how we approach things like education, social policy, building institutions?
If external factors and opportunity structures are so critical, then creating success isn't just about motivating individuals. It's about actively designing systems and environments that provide more equitable access to those crucial opportunities. And the KIPP Academy example from the source is a fantastic illustration of this.
Right. KIPP schools in underprivileged areas, what do they do differently?
KIPP serves mostly low-income students, often facing significant challenges. They get students via lottery, not by selecting for ability. Yet, they achieve incredible results in getting these kids to college.
And their secret isn't some revolutionary teaching technique, but more about time and structure.
That's the key point highlighted. KIPP fundamentally changes the structure of the school experience to provide more opportunity for focused effort. They have much longer school days, mandatory Saturday classes, and a significantly shorter summer break.
They're tackling that summer learning loss problem head-on, the one that disproportionately affects lower-income kids.
Exactly. Research shows disadvantaged kids often keep pace during the school year, but fall way behind over the long summer when they lack access to enriching activities their wealthier peers have. KIPP basically eliminates that long gap by providing more structured learning time throughout the year.
So they're essentially applying the lessons of the 10,000-hour rule and the rice paddy culture. They're creating the opportunity for sustained, focused effort to overcome background disadvantages.
Precisely. They're showing that by changing the environment and the structure of opportunity, you can dramatically improve outcomes. It proves success isn't solely predetermined by background. You can build systems that create pathways. It's a powerful argument for structural solutions, not just individual ones.
It really makes you reflect, doesn't it? For you listening, Think about your own life, your own path. What hidden advantages, what lucky timing, what family lessons or cultural inheritances might have played a role in where you are today?
And how does this change the way you look at the successful people you know or admire? Does it make you more curious about the context, the opportunities, the legacies behind their story, rather than just crediting their individual genius?
Seeing success this way, as this blend of person and circumstance, it doesn't take away from the hard work. Gates was obsessed. The Beatles did practice relentlessly. Those lawyers did work incredibly hard.
No, it doesn't diminish the effort, but it places that effort within its necessary context. It suggests success is maybe best understood not as a solo flight, but as dedication meeting opportunity within a specific time and place. It highlights our dependence on the world around us.
It's definitely a challenging perspective, pushing against that very American ideal of the rugged individual. And it leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? Building on everything we've explored from the source material.
If we accept that opportunity, background and timing play such a massive, often arbitrary role in success.
Then what's our responsibility? Individually, maybe in how we mentor or support others, and collectively in how we design our schools, our workplaces, our society. What's our responsibility to create more of that fertile ground, more genuine opportunity for everyone, regardless of the circumstances of their birth?
Or maybe, thinking about those cultural legacies, the question is also how we can better recognize and leverage the diverse strengths and toolkits that different backgrounds provide. Instead of forcing everyone into one narrow path to success, could we unlock more potential by valuing different approaches and perspectives?
Really important questions to think about long after this deep dive ends. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration into the real story of success. We hope it's given you a new lens through which to see the world, and maybe even yourself.